In the industry of popular music, it's rather rare to see an up-and-coming band strike big with a massive hit album and not quickly follow up with more of the same. In October of 1995, No Doubt, comprised primarily of Gwen Stefani, Tony Kanal, Tom Dumont, and Adrian Young, released their landmark album, Tragic Kingdom. Eventually going on to becoming a multi-platinum smash hit, it initially didn't even chart on the Billboard Top 100 until January 1996. With singles like Just a Girl, Don't Speak, and Spiderwebs, it was inevitable that No Doubt's third album would become a huge success. Touring from October 1995 all the way until December 1997 was a grind for sure. But one could imagine the success they found along the way kept spirits high, especially when the band only initially expected to tour for 2 months in support of Tragic Kingdom. So the band began recording their fourth album in January 1998 at a handful of recording studios in the Los Angeles area, and spent their days working tirelessly on songwriting in a rented house in the Hollywood Hills. They ultimately decided on collaborating with producer Glenn Ballard, most famous for co-writing and producing Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. Initially presenting Ballard a whopping 40 demos to pick through, he was able to whittle down this massive collection to 20 songs eligible for recording. With 3 years having passed from Tragic Kingdom's release, much had changed from a musical and personal standpoint for the band. For one, the band derived quite a bit of inspiration from new wave bands like The Cars and The Cure. Their previous heavy influence of ska would now be brought to a minimum on the new release. Tension would also rise between the two halves of the band, with Kanal and Stefani leaning towards writing more mellowed, introspective tunes, while Young and Dumont fought to retain some edge to the music, sneaking in distorted guitars and fast tempos whenever they could. Where Tragic Kingdom featured many gripping and up-tempo songs, mostly concerned with the failed relationship of Kanal and Stefani, the lyrics on the new record reflected the pass of time and change of scenario. Now Stefani, in a relationship with Bush frontman and future husband Gavin Rossdale, the lyrical content seemed much more based on her insecurities in dating a groupie-hounded rock star and her suppressed desires to become a mother without the distractions of fame and fortune. It's also important to note here that Stefani's brother and keyboardist Eric had departed the band in 1994 to pursue a career in animation. While he didn't write all of Tragic Kingdom, he did take on a fair share of music and lyric writing, and thus No Doubt's new record would be one in which Gwen was for the first time expected to take on all lyric writing duties. By July of 1999, the band had wrapped up recording, mixing, and mastering of the album, tentatively titled Magic's in the Makeup. Or so they thought. Interscope's executives had different ideas, pushing them to write more exciting single-worthy tracks to balance the heft of ballads on the album. Kanal, Young, and Dumont initially fought this, citing Interscope's history of not believing in the band, going all the way back to the release of their debut album in 1992, and they also felt that Tragic Kingdom was simply too old a record to cheaply capitalize on. Ultimately, they relinquished and headed back into the studio the next month, resulting in the writing of 2 singles in Ex-Girlfriend and Simple Kind of Life. The new name for the record as of November was now Saturn Returns, but would eventually be modified to a final title in Return of Saturn. This title is a reference to astrology. Your Saturn return is said to be a period of contemplation and self-reflection. The mastering stage of the album was finally completed in December, and January 2000 saw the release of the album's first single, Ex-Girlfriend. On April 11th, 2000, Return of Saturn would finally see its release. While it was certified platinum selling in 1 month, by the next year it was clear the record did not approximate the mind-blowing success of their 1995 magnum opus. It did, however, show and prove that there was still demand for more No Doubt after all, and that the band was very much welcome in the new millennium. To me, the album is incredible. While it's slower and more somber, there's exciting tracks littered here and there that help to keep it from becoming too flat of an experience. The record in question is very much a meeting at the middle for the ska rock of Tragic Kingdom and the hyper-pop, dancehall-inspired sound of Rocksteady. This feeling of transition is exemplified perfectly on some of the released B-sides that were cut from the final album. See, the 2004 B-Sides album features several tracks that weren't deemed a good fit during the Return of Saturn sessions, many of which lack the clear-headedness of the final record, and some of which do retain some of the more ska and reggae qualities as heard on Tragic Kingdom. I believe that during this time frame, the band were perhaps a bit directionally confused. How do you record the follow-up to a giant hit after 5 years? Especially when you consider the jump from 1995 to 2000 for pop culture was rather large. How do you recapture an audience that is now 5 years older and probably already outgrown their ska phase? What if it's just you and your band that outgrew their ska phase, but your fan base hasn't? Even Gwen's lyrics, though not in direct reference to her career path per se, do refer to a sort of confusion in her personal life and her inability to reconcile her past with her present. I'm sure these kinds of issues loomed over the heads of the band during the writing and recording, and luckily these concerns did not damage the overall quality of the record. Many in the music industry will tell you that it's not just your hit record that defines you, but how you follow it up that can make or break your career. Had the album been a dud, it's quite possible neither No Doubt nor Gwen Stefani would be remembered fondly over the decades, or remembered at all. We've all heard a song from our youth and thought, whatever happened to those guys? Only to find out that they ended up working at a marketing firm or became a bartender after their music career fizzled out. All this being said, I think it's safe to say that Return of Saturn is an extremely crucial point in the band's career for better or worse. The better is that No Doubt's records still hold up, with Return of Saturn being a very strong anchor in between two wildly popular albums, and for worse in turning Gwen Stefani even further away from her roots and being the catalyst that would see her enter the world of tabloid news and Hollywood starlets. In January of 2001, No Doubt headed back in the studio on the West Coast to record what would become Rocksteady, though they'd also spent some time in Jamaica and London to connect with a new influence. This time, the result would be much more dancey and poppy than anything they've ever released previously. The music, this time inspired by Jamaican dancehall, was much more upbeat, but if Return of Saturn had lost much of their rock edge, Rocksteady had evaporated the rest of it. The lyrics were written much faster and with much less emotional depth than what we heard on the two previous records. Without question, it's a good album, but it's more the type you'd put on at a party in the early 2000s than you'd actually connect to. Saturn put the band on a course to capture a catchy simplicity, one that would, of course, reward them in the long run. Rocksteady went on to be certified double platinum and won them 2 Grammy Awards. They even played the 2003 Super Bowl halftime show. In 2004, Stefani would launch her solo career with the release of Love Angel Music Baby, which would be certified quintuple platinum and served as her entrance into the world of pop iconhood. So to close, Return of Saturn truly speaks to me as the transitional point between the Gwen Stefani of old, humble, down-to-earth, and troubled by personal issues that are pretty much universal, and the Gwen of the last 2 decades, a superstar, a fashion icon, a rich and famous person troubled by personal issues that only really rich and famous people can relate to. I ultimately find it unfortunate that she left her band to toil, when No Doubt could have been a more serious outlet for musical expression in some form or another. When the band finally did reunite in 2012, it was simply a case of too little too late, and the release of Push and Shove, while selling moderately well for the time, is one that is far too flat, far too generic, and far too derivative of Stefani's solo career to stand out at all among the band's towering discography.